communicating effectively. With Grammarly, Grammarly helps you rewrite your sentences for clarity.
We'll triple.
Can Caitlin Melgard come up to the podium, please? Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We're about to begin in a couple of seconds. If I can request for the door at the back to be closed. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes to make before we begin this morning's program. First of all, I would like to seek your cooperation in the smooth running of this event. Kindly switch your mobile phones to silent mode and limit the use of the auditorium doors to avoid interruptions. Good morning, everyone. I am Nupur Bal, the coordinator of the Gateway Academy at Booten High School, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for the 2022 Senior Thesis presentation. On behalf of the Gateway Academy, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all students, parents, faculty and staff present in person, or those tuning in to our YouTube channel for this live-streamed event. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. Throughout the 2021-2022 school year, the Gateway Academy students have worked diligently to develop, write, and refine their crowning achievement, a thesis paper that explores wide-ranging topics such as social media and identity, social justice, health and wellness. In particular, they have chosen topics that challenge an intellectual question or the status quo and incite a thought-provoking discussion. The students have gone through a rigorous research and writing process that provided opportunities to interact and engage with faculty members, advisors, and peers, both within and outside the school building. Today, they will showcase their work that they have done throughout the school year and defend their thesis, but thereby completing the final component of their candidacy for graduating with Gateway Honors. Also joining us this morning is our esteemed panel composed of Booten, Lincoln Park District Administration, faculty and staff who will engage in question and answer with our scholars post-presentation. So let's take a moment to meet them. We have Ms. Vicky Cornell, mentor for the Gateway Academy, Mr. Patrick Hancock, also Gateway Mentor Academy, and Ms. Deborah Walway, Vice Principal for Booten High School grades 9 and 11. Please give everyone a round of applause. And now, without further ado, to begin this program, I am pleased to invite upon stage Superintendent of Booten Schools, Mr. Robert Prizzuto, to deliver the opening remarks. Mr. Prizzuto.
Good morning, everyone. I was instructed to straighten out the podium a little bit, so that was my first housekeeping. I'm going to apologize before I start. This will be an extemporaneous few words for the students. I am very distracted by the events yesterday in Uvalde, Texas, and I would feel that I am remiss not to at least address the fact that we are really struggling, and I want our students and our staff to know that this is another very sad day. But I do not want to put a pall over your event this morning, but I just cannot not address that and just go into my words for you. High school, Gateway. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my high school experience this much, because I am both, Gateway was not of my doing. Gateway was by Dr. Johnson, my predecessor. So I cannot say that it was my thinking or my genesis. However, I was very interested when I first came here because Gateway is really a liberal arts, high focus, high intensity academic program. And liberal arts are probably, in my opinion, one of the most important pursuits. You can be going for mechanical engineering, you can be going for medicine, or you could be like me and you went for English and you became an English teacher. But Google, Yahoo, Microsoft, and high-tech companies, they want liberal arts students. Doctors that have what's known as good bedside manner, they are usually people that have this kind of well-roundedness to them because they have done more than just study medicine, and people have done more than just computer science. There probably was something like a Gateway. There was certainly AP, and we had something called Arista with an A, an honor roll in my high school, none of which I participated in. I led the 80s rock and roll high school student existence. Played in bands, did well academically, but did not take advantage of the opportunities that my high school afforded me. And that is not my high school's fault or the guidance of my high school. That was solely me. So what happened was there was a series of starts and stops. I know many of you the seniors, you have your acceptance letters, you know where you're gonna go. You've already met your classmates, or in many cases, your roommates. I remember when Facebook first came out. My stepdaughter was about to go to college, and it was the big thing. Next thing I know, we're talking to her roommate, and it's May and June. So what happens is this program, which I know really creates stress for some of you academically, it is doing a very important service to you, which is to prepare you for when you do go to college. Because when you're not adequately prepared, as I was not, it makes it much more difficult. I was fortunate. I had the support of my parents, always, and my 2 sisters. And I was also fortunate because in New York City, where I grew up in one of the 5 boroughs, I went to City College, open enrollment. Anybody could go. There was no rigorous test to get in. And CUNY gave me a great education. But it could have been different, not that I have any regrets. So I say this as much for the younger Gateway students as I do for the seniors. If you had the opportunity to listen to some of our returning graduates more than a couple months ago, you would hear them tell you how much more they appreciated the lost nights of hanging out and all the work that they did, because they feel that they're better prepared than a lot of their peers that they're now in fairly competitive universities for. When you're at the freshman, sophomore, or junior level in Gateway, you say to yourself, man, this is a lot of work. I can't believe I have 3 AP classes this year. I'm here to tell you, as living proof of someone that did not take advantage of those things, that there is a benefit. And if you stick it out and you put the work in, it's gonna pay off. To our seniors, doing your presentations, public speaking, and being able to give a full presentation of what you're doing is extremely important. And you'll be the last cohort to deliver quite this type of presentation. So to you, I say congratulations, and I know you're gonna do well with your presentations, and you're gonna do phenomenal things when you leave us in less than a month. And to our younger Gateway students and the parents, thank you for your continued time that you're putting into the program. Please speak to your academic guidance counselors and any of the Gateway coordinators and support people if you're having any doubts about the struggle, because again, I'm telling you, it will pay off. So have a good morning, and thank you for having me here this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Prisuto, for those words. And now, our first presenter, Ms. Juliana Fiorentino, is set to major in nursing and pursue a career in the pediatric field, specifically neonatal nursing at Southeastern University. She has been involved in dance, gymnastics, and cheer since she was 5 years old and intends to continue cheering in college. Jules, as she is known to her close friends and family, is excited to see what the future holds for her. And she says she is grateful for the awesome teachers at Booton High School who have helped support and guide her through the last 4 years. Her topic today, canceled. Jules.
Mic is caught around. The mic is caught around the seat. Hold on 1 second. Everyone, my name's Jules Fiorentino. I'm just gonna hold this because I can't get it back around my head. I decided to do my project on cancel culture and specifically the damaging effects that it can have on teen mental health. I found this to be a really interesting topic just because social media is such a new fad that's going on right now, and we're constantly observing the effects of it, especially as high schoolers every day in our lives. And society is constantly providing us with new examples of cancel culture, like this. I'm sure we're all familiar with the Will Smith situation. So I just found it to be a really interesting topic. So these tweets are just a few examples of what it looks like to be canceled online as a celebrity. I thought this was just a good opener, to get into what canceling looks like as a celebrity. But also, I would just want to give a quick definition for those of you who may not be super familiar for what canceling means. Canceling is a form of ostracization in which you remove your support from someone. Thank you. In which you can remove your support from someone on social media, and it's a boycott on a person, to say the least. It's when they act in a manner where you deem it socially or morally unacceptable, and you're basically saying, I don't want to support this person anymore. Many instances of cancel culture, like the Will Smith one, have come up, and it was originally used for social activism purposes, in which big celebrities with large social media platforms would be checked and basically say, okay, this is not okay, you can't go on with this. But in recent years, it has transformed into bullying for the sake of bullying, which is damaging and wrong. The point of this thesis is not to disregard the need for progressive attitudes, only that cancel culture, as it has been transformed, is damaging to teen mental health, because it's been transformed into basically a mass public humiliation and a way to morally rip someone apart online. So when writing my paper, cancel culture is such a big thing to digest that I wanted to separate it into specific categories. So the first category I wanted to distinguish was, what's the difference between celebrity cancellation and teen cancellation, because there is a big difference, and what it looks like in social situations. So going back to the Will Smith example, he lost movies with Netflix, Apple TV, and Sony because of his fiasco at the Oscars. He also lost many Instagram followers and was forced to resign from the Academy, and many of his movies are now under review. But for teenagers who do not have millions of followers on Instagram and who are not, their moves are not being watched by everyone in the world, cancellation can look a little bit different. Teens who are canceled are often left out, snubbed, bullied, ignored, and isolated. Teens are at a critical age where conversation development is required in order for them to mature and to be productive members of society. Teens also need the experience of being wrong and being able to have uncomfortable conversations, as to where when you're canceled, it's basically just you're being shut out and shut down and your opinion is not being heard. And for many teens, cancellation is not just a teaching moment, it's public humiliation and bullying. So Newport Academy did a really large brain study in which they were able to merge the gap between social pain and physical pain. And as you can see in this diagram, the hemispheres of the brain that deal with social pain and physical pain are the same. So when you deal socially with pain, it lights up the same parts of the brain as physical pain symptoms. And at an age where peer connections are incredibly important, this can be very damaging to teens going through a lot in high school. Many therapists report treating teen clients who suffered from depression and suicidality just months after being canceled by their peers. In my paper, I also outsourced a survey from Pew Research Center in which 64% of the surveyed participants testified to the fact that social media had a negative impact on the mental and emotional soundness of teens, and they cited as their #1 reason online toxicity. I also cited a survey from BBC Future in which they studied the emotional content of 100 million Facebook users. They basically were able to prove that a bad mood spreads throughout social media. They found that one negative post influenced 1.3 negative posts by people who came into contact with the initial negative post. I also did my own open-ended survey in which I asked administrators around the school 3 questions regarding their knowledge and observations about how social media and toxic culture can affect the proceedings of teenagers. The first question I asked was, are you aware of the definition of being canceled? This was just to really get a baseline of who I was interviewing and to make sure that the accuracy of the next answers they provided would be accurate. if they weren't aware of the definition of being canceled, a backup definition would be provided to them, but most of the participants had a full understanding of what it meant to be canceled. The second question I asked was, how do you think the idea of canceling someone affects mental health of teens on social media? Answers varied in depth, but the general consensus affirmed the footprint that toxic cancel culture leaves on the mental health of teens. And then the last question I asked was, have you personally seen a spike in bad mental health in teens since social media has become more popular? Most participant answers sought to confirm that cancel culture played a significant role in the decline in teen mental health. So basically the essential question, just reiterating, was why cancel culture is damaging to teen development. And teens need to be able to form their own beliefs and identities and form their own opinions. And when having that constant worry of being canceled by your peers or being bullied for saying your opinion, that's not healthy. They need to be able to converse on matters that they disagree on instead of just shutting out and shutting down, because when conversations are not happening, progress is not happening. Cancel culture allows kids to bypass empathy in favor of being right. Once again, shutting other people's opinions out and shutting down when tough conversations need to be had. And this type of environment doesn't allow for growth or correction of behavior, which is damaging to teen development and their mental health. And that's the end. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Okay, am I good? Are there questions? Okay. I mainly tailored my focus to the administration just because I know a lot of the students know what cancel culture is and they see it with big celebrities, and it's like human nature to imitate almost. So when we see the over-cancellation of big celebrities online, that's what we imitate in our social situations. So I wanted to interview the teachers just because I think that's where it starts. Like, teens need people that they can go to discuss these type of things when they feel like they can't discuss it in their own social circles. So I interviewed teachers just to like gauge the awareness of these proceedings at school, so they know like, okay, I can go to this person or I can't go to that person, because they don't really know what it is.
I think you did a fantastic job. I think that this is really an important topic, and I'm just curious, now that you're so informed, would it dissuade you from using social media, or do you still think that it's an important part of your life?
I definitely think that social media itself is toxic, and we kind of like over-materialize. Like in my paper, I talked about how social media is just very materialized. Like, either you want the perfect body of a Victoria's Secret model, or you want the salary of an NFL football star. Like, it's just like, it kind of presents that unattainable goal for like middle and lower class people that like high class celebrities project onto everyone else. So I definitely think like social media as a whole is flawed. And it kind of just like, to answer your question, yes, it kind of threw me off. I'm not going to stop using social media, but I'm more aware of what goes on, which I think being aware is very important in a way to counterbalance.
And I'll just follow up to that, Jules. Really nice job. You're talking about the importance of awareness with teens and cancel culture, and then also like what you can do about it, and trying to have more positive posts, for example. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, your own thoughts on how teenagers, so high school students, could be made just more aware of that phenomenon?
I think it really just comes with like, I know high school for a lot of teens is very, not traumatic, but it's very hard. And you're finding yourself and you're finding your own voice. And I think teens just need to be more open to having these uncomfortable conversations, because like I said before, when conversations are not had, no progress is happening. So it really comes from within. It's not really anything anyone else can force on you. Like, you can sit here and listen to my presentation about it, but until you go back into your own social situations and make the change in yourself, there's really no way to, make progress. think that's it.
Thank you, Jules, for getting us started. What an interesting topic. If I might remind the seniors, as you finish your presentation, to please move to Ms. Oliveri's room for your red carpet moment, and then you can return from the side doors. Thank you. Okay. Now, our next presenter, Andrew DeFalco, President of the Class of 2022 and President of the National Honor Society, also a two-sport athlete who has played football for Booton High School for the past 4 years and baseball. During the past football season, he was awarded the Independence White All-Division second team for the position of center. He will be going to the University of Southern California to pursue economics. His thesis explores the effect of social media on today's youth. Andrew DeFalco, everyone.
Okay. Okay. When I present it from here, it just says return. Usually it's right here. Here? Oh, okay. Okay, good start. So my topic, as you guys heard, was the effects of social media on today's youth. And again, why I chose the topic, I think it's just relevant today because obviously, you know, I am a teenager. And we're kind of the first generation to grow up with social media through the whole, like our whole childhood. So there's been studies conducted and you can kind of see how it's affecting us today. So first, I wanted to start off the presentation. If you guys have your phones, could you take them out really fast? And then go to your settings. I'll wait for you guys, you know, get out. And then once you're there, there should be a tab for screen time. If you could click on that, and then click on see all activity. And then at the top, you have to go to week because it'll just be on the day, and it'll be like 30 minutes or whatever. But you have to see the week, and you'll see your weekly average, and that's how many hours in the past week per day you spent on social media, or not on social media, but just on your phone. You can see the breakdown about what it's on, but I want you to keep that number in the back of your mind as I go through this. Oh, the clicker, right, yeah, there we go. So, social media usage, it's used for everything in today's society. You know, you turn to the left, you turn to the right, people will be on their phone, and usually it'll be on social media. We use it for news. You know, a lot of times when you think about it, you think of scrolling through Instagram, looking at pictures of your friends, but it's used for more than just that, you know. You get your news there, you're just on your phone so much that it's easier than that, than to turn on the TV and listen to everything. You can just find what you want. So it's impossible for adults to understand today. Like I said, we're really the first generation to grow up with it through our entire lives. And your parents don't really get it. Like they can try to, but they're just not going to be able to. It's kind of a foreign concept. And a lot of times when kids are, you know, going through something or something happened to them, even if it's just like a headache or something, their parents would be like, it's because you're always on that phone, right? Everyone's heard it. It's frustrating to hear, but really, it might not be that crazy of a thing. So I'll get into that. So mental health, what is mental health? It affects it's your psychological, your physical, your physiological, it's everything, your health, just how you deal with things, how you deal with stress, how you deal with anxiety, everything, all of that. And it was previously ignored, right? Because people used to just be like, it doesn't really matter. You're crazy. You'll be looked at a crazy person. But it's really come to light today because we realize, wow, maybe if people feel better, they'll do better, right? So the reason it's important, the way you make decisions, it'll affect something. If you feel better, you'll make better decisions. You'll think them through more. If you're stressed, you're like, whatever. You'll make a, quick decision. Maybe you'll regret it. But mental health or mental illness increase. So mental illnesses, like examples, I'll start with that. Anxiety, depression, eating disorders, stuff that'll affect just your brain, everything. So social media and mental health have both increased together. Like I said, social media wasn't a thing, so obviously that's increasing. And then the World Health Organization found a 13% increase in mental illness overall, and they found a 70% increase in teens alone, which is obviously an alarming rate. We want to get to the bottom of that. You don't want the future of your country to all be mentally ill. Could these be linked? So I wanted to go into it, but originally you think, right, we're in a pandemic, you're isolated, you're stuck in your own house, and you'll be in your own head. So that could have been a thing, and obviously when you're stuck inside, you'll turn to your phone. It's something to do. You get bored. But I wanted to go into a deeper dive and not just that, blame it on the pandemic, So my materials and methods, I wanted to survey Boonton High School because I think it's important. We have this a diverse group of students, and I wanted to hear from them because I want different opinions from different people, rather than just studies like, okay, yeah, they're studies, but they're really just numbers there. When from pooling Boonton High School, they're real people. I know these people. So the questions on the survey, we're asking the screen time question that I asked at the start. Go to your screen time, see how much time you spend on your phone in general, and then on what. It broke down the categories. I wanted to know, I don't really care about everything else, quite frankly. I just wanted to know social media. Negative behaviors, asking about whether you think that someone, either you personally or someone have done something that you wouldn't have because of the influence of social media. And then face-to-face interaction. Again, face-to-face interaction obviously went down because of the pandemic. You couldn't do face-to-face interaction. But I wanted to know how much they thought social media in general affected that, because you can just text someone instead of talking to them in person. And then I used different studies too, because I didn't want to just use this group, but really that was just to confirm everything. So the other studies, a 2013 study conducted by Johns Hopkins found that passive use of social media, just checking your phone every so often, whatever, not even just mindlessly scrolling for hours and hours, people reported less satisfaction in life, which is a little alarming, just casually using it. And then a 2015 study also found, they studied 6,500 12 to 15-year-olds, and they found that anyone that spent 3 hours a day or more were more likely to report back with a mental illness. A 2016 study conducted in England by the BBC found that 450 teens were surveyed and found that nighttime use of social media or any emotional investment at all into it decrease your sleep quality, and a decrease in sleep quality leads to an increase in mental illness, usually anxiety, stuff like that. And then a 2019 study also conducted by Johns Hopkins on 12,000 13 to 16-year-olds found that just using it 3 times a day, does not matter how long, whatever, picking up your phone, going on social media 3 times a day, led to an increase in mental illness as well. So I wanted to confirm this with Boonton, obviously. And on average, how many hours per day do you spend on your phone? You can see where you land in this now that you guys know. But you can see that the majority of it, or that answered it, spent 6 to 8 hours or more on it, which is a pretty hefty time. And then what do you spend most of your screen time on? 63% said social media. That wasn't really shocking. I kind of expected that, but you can see that's the majority of the time spent there. Do you believe people engage in negative behaviors because of social media? You can see 73% said yes, so they believe, or at least maybe they don't know someone, but they believe that maybe themselves did something that they wouldn't have without it. And then 76% of people believe that it's led to a decrease in face-to-face interaction. So I wanted to know, why is all this? And when you're on social media and you're scrolling through social media, right, these things have algorithms. And when you like something or you're consistently viewing something, they pick up on that, right, because they want you to spend more time on their app. So if they're showing you something that you like, you're more than likely to spend time on that. And when you're consistently liking stuff like, oh, this is my friend and they're on vacation, they look so happy, and oh, it's this person, they look so happy doing this, that pops up more and more. And you, on social media, you only see the highlights of people's lives. Like, you don't post the lowlights of your life on social media. It's just not what you do. So when you're consistently seeing other people at their highest, and you're like, why do I not feel like that? Why is this not me? It gets in your head, and there's these things called echo chambers, right? And you just keep saying these things in your head. It keeps coming back, and eventually these things build up. I mean, if you're consistently feeling like everyone else is living such a better life, it's gonna affect you, and you're gonna think you're the problem. So that's a lot of times why that happens. And I think it's important. I think it's important to recognize, that that's not like, drawing from Jules, sorry, but you're looking into it and you're going through it with caution, right? Because I don't think that you're going to ever be able to just completely eliminate social media, and I don't think that's a good thing, because there are good things that come out of social media, right? But I think that you have to be aware of what it is and what you're scrolling through, and that's important. I think that's how you do it. So again, an excessive amount of it in general isn't good. You should try to limit it as much as you can. I know me personally, when I did the screen time, mine was way, way up. I won't share that. I won't embarrass myself right now. But, and, I can see the effects on me myself. And since I've limited it, I've used it less, and it's definitely helped a little bit. And then, again, the restrictions, they're not going to really be able to happen. But just because, America, free country, you're not going to be able to tell people what they can and can't do on social media. But I think it's important for parents to really recognize, their kid, monitor the kid. Not monitor them, but just make sure they're not spending, 15 hours a day on social media, and, check in on them, make sure that they're okay, and, hammer home the fact that that's just the best of that person's life. It's not how they feel every second. So that is my presentation. If anyone has any questions, please do ask. Kate. Okay.
I just want to know how many hours a day you spent on your phone.
Now?
No, before.
Okay, before it was
Embarrass yourself, Andrew.
It was over 10, I'll tell you that. It was over 10.
Oh my God.
Not significantly over 10, but it was over 10. Now it's 6. I checked right before this. It's 6 now, so we're getting there. We're getting there, right?
And you said you did see an improvement?
Yeah, I mean,
yourself?
obviously it's not an isolated thing. Obviously there's other things changing your life constantly, but I definitely feel eventually you kind of feel it, just when you're mindlessly scrolling through, you kind of feel gross, and I felt that feeling less, so I definitely think it's helped using it less.
Andrew, I have a question for you. Great job.
Thank you.
Deb, can you just ask into the mic? Just, yeah.
Can't hear me.
So Andrew, in my role, as well as Ms. Brogan's role, we deal with students who constantly, a lot of the issues that come before us come from social media and stuff that's happening all day long outside of school weekends. How do you think we get the message out? Because both you and Jewel have done your research on this, and it's very interesting. But coming from an adult, it doesn't make the same message to a student. But coming from you guys, it might. So I'm asking, how do you see helping us as school administrators get the message out to the youth of today, just what you've kind of found in your own decrease of use?
So I think, like you said, coming from an adult, it's a lot different. Because I had always heard, oh, you should use your phone less, or my mom would make fun of me for being on my phone so much. But it doesn't really mean as much coming from an adult, like you said. But I think that if other people, because it's becoming more of a common thing for people to really become conscientious of this and, limit their own screen time. So I think that if there was other students that they personally know, because it means more when it comes from someone you know and, like. So I think that if people that had had the experience and then were comfortable. Obviously, they'd have to be comfortable talking about it because it's a personal thing. But if they were to talk to other students and really be like, okay, this helped me, so if you're struggling, it'll help you too. I think that's important because adults, obviously, their intentions are good, but it's just teenagers are teenagers and they don't really care. As mean as it sounds, it's just true. So I think that if it came from their peers, it would mean more. Mr. Hancock.
Yeah, so I'm curious your opinion on if the corporations have any responsibility here. I know, for example, if I play certain Nintendo games for too long, a little message pops up on the screen and says, hey, you should probably take a break, right? It's been a while. Do you think Apple should incorporate anything, or Samsung on the root of the phone, or maybe Snapchat should just a quick message? Is it their responsibility, in your opinion, to try and combat some of this?
I think it is. Well, first I'll just say I know TikTok does that. It's kind of cheesy, but when you're scrolling for a while, it'll be like, hey, you should stop. So I know some things are starting to do it, but I think it is because, like I mentioned, they try to get you addicted to it, and they keep showing you stuff. So if they're able to do that, I think that they should also, it's also their responsibility to, if they do get someone addicted, it's their responsibility to be like, hey, maybe don't do this. And it'll be hard because that'll, it's hurting their product. But if it's the better for everyone else, I think it is kind of their responsibility. And obviously, you can do your own stuff to try to do that, but I mean, realistically, you get lost in your phone. That's a real thing. So I think if they were to incorporate something like that, it would be beneficial. Because you just don't, sometimes you don't realize how much time passes. You're just there for forever. So, anybody else?
I'm just kind of curious. I'm a middle school principal, so I have 6th grade students and a parent of young children. Based on your studies, what age do you think is the appropriate age to get a cell phone? Knowing the downside and the positives, knowing the peer pressure, knowing what's happening, at what time is the appropriate time for someone to get a phone?
I think that your teenage years is probably better because even your teenage brain is still developing, but when you're when you're in middle school, you're younger, 10 years old, you're way more impressionable. You see anything and you want to do it. And high schoolers, they'll jump off a bridge if their friend does too. But it's a little different when you're younger, because you just want to fit in more. I guess it's not really that, but you just don't really have you don't recognize right from wrong as easily. So I think that the earlier the worse, honestly. And I got my phone pretty early, 5th grade probably. So it's kind of hypocritical for me to say, but I think that it's probably better that you wait till high school. Again, this isn't scientifically backed. Obviously I did the research, but this exact question didn't come up. But based on everything that I've read, I'd say probably your teenage years, 13, getting into high school is better. Because, I mean, a phone, you still, you want to communicate with your kid, you want to know they're safe. And there's other ways to do that, but especially in high school, just getting the text, being able to call them definitely helps. So I think that going into high school is probably the best time.
Thank you, Andrew. We're going to give the next speaker a couple of seconds to set up. Okay, so that was a tough act to follow, but our next scholar, Ava Lyon, is up for the challenge. So after high school, Ava is going to be attending Northern Vermont University and plans to pursue general fine arts, which she hopes will allow her to travel around the world and admire the various cities and their artistic styles. From graphite illustrations and paintings, Ava spends most of her free time indulging in her artistic soul. She will be presenting on the fight for individuality. Ava Lyon.
Okay, so to begin with, what is an individualist? So the definition is pretty loose, it's pretty flexible, but the most agreed upon definition is when someone sees themselves as separate from others and doesn't define themselves by who they're around. Their traits are relatively stable and unchanging. So some common traits of an individualist are high levels of extroversion. They need to be able to branch out to other people, but they don't rely on the people that they're branching out to. They have an independent attribute to them. Like I said, they don't rely on other people. And they have self-supporting lifestyles. So that could be anything from working for themselves or being totally independent and living off the grid, like farming for themselves, getting their food for themselves, just being self-reliant for their necessities. And on the other hand, we have conformists. Now, same with individualist, conformist, the definition is pretty loose, but a lot of people agree that it's when someone sees himself as connected to others and they define themselves by their relationship and their traits are more likely to change based on what's happening around them. They're not very stuck in their way. They kind of go with whatever way the wind blows. Does that make sense? And some common traits are high levels of introversion. They like to stay within their group. If their group does something, they do it too. And they're not likely to branch out and talk to other groups to see what they're doing. They like to stay within. And they have interdependent traits and dependency on others. Interdependent is when a group relies on itself. If I was in a group with Miss Cornell, we'd be relying on each other, which is the same as dependency on others. Now that you know what a individualist is and a conformist is, which do you think you are? If I could have a show of hands for who thinks they're an individualist. Awesome. Who thinks they're a conformist? Who maybe thinks they're a mix of both? Okay. So throughout this presentation, I'll be talking about social media's effect on individuality and conformity, as well as how culture affects individuality and conformity, which is also the culture of individuality and conformity, as well as the socioeconomics of individuality and conformity. So, as you can imagine, social media, like Jules and Andrew talked about, is one hell of a way to promote collectivism, as it promotes people to fit in and follow the trends. It affects the people, it affects the concept of fitting in, and it affects fashion. And I conducted a survey on Boonton High School students about how much they felt social media decreased their feelings of individualism. And as you can see on the left side, we have heavily decreased individualism. And 17 out of 25 total participants said that they thought social media decreased their individualism, whereas only 4 said that social media heavily increased their individualism, and 4 said that social media had no effect. Even though social media does promote a feeling that you have to fit in, social media can be good because not a lot of people have access to in-person volunteer centers or have access to funds to donate to causes they care about. So by having activism virtually, they can spread awareness and potentially spread the topic to people that can donate or people that can go out and support the cause in person. It can also create an outlet for people to express their views on social injustices or just have a safe space to go to. If I lived in a town where the color was red, but my favorite color was purple. I wouldn't feel comfortable going around wearing purple shirts if everyone else is wearing red, but I could go on social media and find other people who like wearing purple. So I could feel like I fit in and not have to worry about face-to-face confrontations. But again, if everyone in my town is wearing red, I might want to. And if everyone on social media is wearing red, I might want to as well, which comes up with keeping up with the trends. There's trends in slang usage, housing and decor trends, as well as clothing trends. Trends in slang are probably the most easy to keep up with, but they can also make you feel the worst about yourself if you always have to look up what a certain word means. Like if everyone's saying sick instead of cool, but I didn't know that, all of a sudden everyone's saying sick instead of cool, and I have to look it up to make sure it's not physically ill, but it's actually cool. With housing and decor, as well as clothing, it can become expensive to constantly have to change your wardrobe or change the way your house looks. If the latest style is not at all what it was 2 months ago, now you have to change your whole look if you want to fit in. And with clothing, the trends have become much faster, which is how we get into fast fashion and how fashion affects people and the earth. First of all, what is fast fashion? It's mainly defined as quick, cheap, trendy, and disposable clothing that manufacturers create very quickly to get on shelves very quickly so that people can keep up with the trends that are set at breakneck speeds. And how does social media and collectivism contribute to this? Because of how much social media has a reach and how people want to fit in, the desire to have the same articles of clothing that's trendy in Australia, in New York, it just reaches everyone so much faster. And when the trend ends, because trends have shortened their lifespan, trends used to last almost decades, and now they last just a couple months, maybe years if they're lucky. Americans throw away 81 pounds of clothes. Each American throws away 81 pounds of clothes on average a year, which can build up to 13 million pounds of clothing in landfills yearly, just by Americans. And 17 million tons of textile waste, so that's by the manufacturers themselves. And now we'll talk about the culture of individuality versus conformity. So individualists, their culture is based on independence, competition, and personal achievement. They want to feel like they're doing better than someone else, but if they're in a group activity, if someone else in the group did poorly, but they did fine, it's still okay. Whereas conformists, they want social harmony, respectfulness, and the group needs over individual needs. And in studies done on individualist versus conformist relationships, individualists are more likely to stay away from relationships entirely, whereas conformists will stay in relationships even if the relationship isn't benefiting them anymore. And there's a quote on the screen about how pesky individualists can be in a conformist society. And in the same survey, I asked how much students felt that their culture decreased their sense of individualism, with the same scale, heavily decreased individualism in the 1 and 2 column, and heavily increased individualism on the 4 and 5. And it was pretty split. A lot of people said that their individualism wasn't affected at all, which could be that they aren't very culturally involved, or that they just felt that their individualism wasn't affected. But more people did say that their culture increased their individualism, which did go against what I believed they would respond as, but that's okay. And with group activities like cultures, you get into like socioeconomics. And in studies done by Frontiers in Japan, it found that when Japan was first in their more impoverished state, they had more conformity than they did individuality. But as Japan grew economically valuable, they became more individualistic, which can also be observed in other countries as well. Like in Africa, they have more poverty and they're more conformist, whereas in America and Canada, we're more economically valuable, we have more individualistic. And here's a map of collectivism and individualism. More purple is individualist, and more pink is collectivist. White has not as much data or no data. But in order to have one, there needs to be the other, so that's where we have to find a balance. And with social media, knowing what you personally like, your morals, and keeping up with the trends. If I don't like purple, I'm not going to keep up with the trend for that. If the trend is purple and I don't like it now, but I won't keep up with it if it doesn't suit me. But that's my presentation. Thank you. Any questions?
I'd like to invite the panel to ask questions.
Sure.
Yeah, so I got two questions. One quick one. What would you consider yourself on this scale? Leaning one way or the other, a good balance?
I'd say maybe a balance, possibly more individualistic. I think I was more conformist a couple years ago, but I like being my own person, but I have a copy-paste name. It's very common, as you'll hear with Ava Oberlin later, but
I like that. And then, so my second question, I feel like as a society, especially now, we really champion individuality.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of like stock images of a bunch of gray people and then like the one green guy, right? Or like a bunch of dull pencils and a sharp pencil. There's like a million of those, right? But you're talking about finding the balance. So when should conformity be more encouraged over individuality? Like, where do we start to seek that balance and say, you know what, sometimes it's okay to conform? Like, when is that, do you think?
In my paper, I talked about when conforming is good, and that's when, like, you need group action. Like, with the Black Lives Matter protests, you saw group action to take a stand against a social injustice. And just when group activities, usually being surrounded by people who support you feels good. Like if you're struggling with mental health, it's good to have people around you and be able to conform to the happiness of people around you instead of try to be stuck in the I, myself mindset.
And then quick follow-up. So I feel like conformity has such a negative stigma attached to it too, right? Like, hey, don't be a conformist, right? How do we get that message out? Like, how do you phrase it maybe to let people know that kind of stuff? Do we not use the word conformity and promote more things like activism and those types of phrases?
I think so. I think both individuality and conformity both have their negatives to them, because individuality seems like a very selfish mindset, and conformist seems like you don't have your own head kind of thing. But I think definitely using different words could help. I know a lot of people say like I for individuality and we for conformity, which could help, but I don't know.
Any other questions from the panel?
Sure, yeah. Nice job, Ava. I could ask you, going back to the fast fashion trend, so like using that example, and social media, because we've been hearing about that all morning. What do you feel could be maybe done to promote an awareness? Because, I mean, I'll be honest, I had no idea what fast fashion was or that this was such an issue, and you highlighted that. But to maybe make people a little bit more aware of some of the effects of conformity in social media and how that could be addressed to have maybe a more positive outcome or not as harmful effects.
I know a lot of like fashion people on social media will talk about how you shouldn't buy from cheap fashion stores like Shein or like those kinds of things because they have cheap materials and they just don't make their products correctly, and they rip off actual designers and just throw whatever they think is on the shelves and people buy it. So I know a little bit about like the activism that is in the fashion industry about that, but a lot of people can't afford to buy bigger, so they have to buy the small priced goods, even though they aren't necessarily the best. So I don't think fast fashion can ever be like eradicated. Not that it's a necessity, but like I think it's stuck with us.
I mean, just to follow up too, maybe this is something, because you're going into a fashion industry, right? So this is something that you might want to pursue as a thought or like creative process that I would think as a fashion designer, you're always wanting to look at like the latest trends and things are changing even seasonally. But how can you kind of take that that theory of fashion but turn it into a more sustainable model?
I think definitely like upcycling and not throwing away textile waste. I've seen artists on TikTok like use paint that they didn't use in one project and fill it in on a huge canvas of just like trash paints. And so they're not throwing away paint or washing it down the drain so it can go into like the ocean. Because a lot of paints are toxic. But there's ways to cut down on your waste, and also if you buy only the things that you love and not just buy it because it's part of the trend, you're not going to be throwing away your things as soon as the trend is over. You might want to hold on to those things.
This is such a fascinating topic. At this time, we'd like to open it up to the audience members. If you have any questions, raise your hand and I'll bring the mic over.
First of all, great job. That was awesome. When you had the slide on, like with the map, did you find anything in your research where countries with like a certain political stance leaned one way towards individuality or conformity, or neighboring countries kind of mirrored each other in individuality and conformity?
I didn't really research that too extensively, but I could go back to that slide. But it feels like more, maybe that's just my opinion, but more American-speaking or English-speaking countries seem more individualistic. As you can see, a lot of Europe is, but of course Europe speaks other languages too. I think it might depend on the dictatorship, because we have a very, like Andrew said, free country kind of thing. No one's gonna want to be like their neighbor. But yeah, I didn't really research that too much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to ask? If you can state your name and your question.
My name's Tamara Kyle. So you mentioned social media, and I was just wondering, do you think that individualism can coexist with social media? Only because, like, if there's like fads going on and you think you're being like an individualist, but then you find out that there's actually a lot more people who are following these trends, like, how do you think that's going to look in the future?
I think it's kind of impossible to be your very own person, because, I mean, if you go to a concert, you're with a lot of people that find the same interests as you, so you're never really going to be strictly your own. You're always going to find commonalities with other people. I think social media can make you feel like an individualist and can make you feel like a conformist. It just depends on, I guess, the way you view it. If you see only like 3 people dressing like you and 1,000 other people that don't dress like you could feel, wow, I kind of feel special. I don't dress like all these other people. But if you're on the other side where you see 3 people that don't dress like you and 1,000 people that do, you could feel, I kind of dress like everybody else. Maybe I should switch it up. But it can go both ways. It just really depends on, I guess, the user for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Ava. So I'd like to invite the next presenter to come up. Is everyone enjoying the presentation so far? Thank you for your appreciation of our speakers. Our seniors, as you can tell, have done a lot of work. At this time, we're going to take a short break. If anybody needs to use the restroom or stretch their legs, I encourage you to do that now, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you.
should have doubt hanging around. God, oh. 'Cause darling, there was nothing right when all you seem to do is lie. Those days are gone. I'm walking tall while you're alone. When I think about the way we used to be, when I think about the things you took from me, I know that I am so much better. I'm better off. When I look at what I've done now that we're apart, when I look at what I've won, I've come so far. I know I'm so much better off. And baby, you don't belong. Your love was cold, heart made of stone. I'm just fine, I'm gonna shine. I'm alright. I'm celebrating my liberation. I'm moving strong, I'll get it done. I'm alright. Might be shaken but not stirred. Just a lesson that I've learned. And so it goes, tables turn, and you're on your own. When I think about the way we used to be, when I think about the things you took from me, I know that I am so much better. I'm better off. When I look at what I've done now that we're apart, when I look at what I've won, I've come so far. I know I'm so much better off. Baby, you don't belong. I know I'm so much better off. Now, baby, you don't belong.
All right, we're about to begin in a few minutes. I'd like to encourage everybody to take their seats.
Just got to get used to that.
All right, so our next presenter is a combination of brains and heart. Caitlin Melgard participates in clubs such as the National Honor Society and Peer Leadership. She will be attending Fairfield University to earn a BSN before going on to become a pediatrics oncology nurse, which has been a calling and a passion for many years. She maintains a job after school with reading, painting, or hanging out with her friends during her free time. Here to talk about the very important and relevant topic of women's abortion rights is Caitlin Melgard.
Good morning, everybody. So as Ms. Ball said, I will be presenting on women's abortion rights and mainly focusing on the fight for access to safe abortions. I'm sure you're all aware of the recent Supreme Court documents that have been leaked, hinting at the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So this is obviously a very relevant topic, and it applies to me because I'm a woman. So just started this thesis project. I covered different aspects of abortions, why they should be easily accessible in the United States and around the world, religious aspects, the actual scientific facts, as well as backstreet abortion rates and what happens when abortion is denied to a pregnant woman. So in the 1970s, a popular court case appeared called Roe versus Wade. And while this is an umbrella law, meaning it has other laws underneath of it, one of the main outcomes was that legal abortions were to be safe and legal for every woman in the United States. And since 2020, which was only 2 years ago, there have been over 1,000 restrictive abortion laws, and that number just keeps going up. So whereas we should be taking a turn to make abortions more accessible, we're rather taking a turn and sort of going back to prior to Roe versus Wade. So some countries, including Iraq, Honduras, Egypt, the Philippines, all have completely restricted abortions, no matter if it was a case of rape or if it harms the mother's health and the mother has a chance of dying. In those countries, especially Honduras is one that I mainly focused on, it is suspected that between 50,000 and 80,000 women a year still receive backstreet abortion methods. And those methods are so gruesome, they usually end up in either the baby dying or the baby and the mother dying. So they're doing methods that, you wouldn't even think to imagine. So in order to collect my own data, I not only use Google Scholar and EBSCO to collect my sources, but I also created an 8-question Google form that collected answers anonymously from students at BHS. Some of those questions were, what is your gender? Do you believe abortion should be a human right? Do you believe mental health can be negatively affected if someone is denied an abortion? I got about 155 responses, I want to say. But when I did this paper, I only studied the 143 because that was how many were there at the moment. But so in the bottom, you can see there, I have a word cloud. It's kind of small, but those were just the keywords that I used when researching, because otherwise hundreds of thousands of articles come up. So this was just to help limit my article findings and find out what was more reliable, common, etc. And so this is just one of the charts that I think is going to be very helpful for everyone to sort of see the world's stance on abortion, because we're focusing on the US and the world. So as you can see, the darker red countries, like these ones, that's where abortion is completely prohibited. So no matter the circumstance, it doesn't matter, you cannot get an abortion, a safe and legal abortion there. Whereas countries that are like light blue, it's for like mothers that are in danger of dying, and that's when they can get abortions. So it varies by country. And then this focuses more so on the United States and the state's stance on abortion. So as we can see, a state like Texas is pretty hostile to abortion, which we can see in the laws that they just passed last year. Whereas California is dark blue, they're very supportive. So it kind of differs between each state. There's not really like an area of the country that's more pro-life or pro-choice. It's kind of like a array across the state. So going back to that anonymous Google form that I created, these are two of the most helpful pie charts that came out of that Google form. So you can see the first one is, do you think abortions are a human right? And 87% of people said yes, and 13% of people said no. And then, do you agree with the statement, my body, my choice? Only 11.2% of people said no, whereas 88.8% said yes. So this kind of supported my original hypothesis that more people were going to be leaning towards pro-choice instead of pro-life. And so just to go more in depth into the questionnaire results, 93.7 people responded yes to believing that women denied abortions can be at higher risk for mental health issues. And that supported my original hypothesis that women denied abortions will suffer from poverty, mental health issues such as depression or anxiety, postpartum depression. So when I was breaking down these Google Forms, I noticed that more males tended to be against abortions and more women tended to be for abortions, believing that abortions are a human right, which, I mean, I guess kind of makes sense. I feel like males tend to steer away from these sort of topics because sometimes they feel like they don't have a place. There was an absence of correlation between the respondents' religion and their view on abortion, which I thought there was going to be a little more correlation, which we'll get into in the next slide. But it really didn't have any correlation at all. 61% of the respondents were females, 33% were males, 1.5 were non-binary, and 3.6 were prefer not to say. And then 86.7 believe abortion is in fact a human right. So a very, very high percentage of people. Now these are just some of the main results I found when researching on Google Scholar and EBSCO. So the Turnaway study is a current study that is being done on women who are denied and received abortions. So they take these groups of women and those who are denied abortions, they study them, and then those who receive their abortions, they study them. And the women who were denied abortions showed higher levels of depression, anxiety, and they also had higher chances of falling below the national poverty level. So compared to the women who received an abortion, they were more content, they were financially and emotionally better off than those who did not receive an abortion. And then moving on to religious opinions, so I did this study, I found this off of a website, Religious Perspectives on Abortion and a Secular Response, just so you know that these aren't like my opinions on the religions. But the Catholic Church sees abortion as a form of unjust homicide because the fetus is considered a human being because life believes at conception. That is what the Catholic Church believes in the Bible. So because life begins at conception, therefore, as soon as conception happens, it is a human being, so it must be treated as such, no matter if it harms the mother or whatever. And now in Judaism, a developing fetus is seen as a sacred form of life and must be treated as such, but if this fetus is potentially harming the mother, such as a uterine carcinoma, which is a cancer of the uterus, or heart defects of the baby or mother, you are allowed to get an abortion in that terms. So, while it's like, oh, if it was an accident, you can't get an abortion, but if it's going to threaten to kill the mother, you can. So that just sort of shows the difference between religious opinions and why we can't really focus on, bless you, we can't we can't make laws off of religious beliefs because they differ so heavily. Just because you believe in one thing doesn't mean that you can decide what I do because you believe that. So just some recommendations. So I could have improved this obviously by speaking with women who have undergone or been denied an abortion just to get that firsthand experience and really understand, firsthand what these women go through and what they have to go through when they are denied abortions, as well as having access to a larger pool of people for the questionnaire. I would have obviously had a larger amount of responses, which just helps anybody's data. So, and then these are just some quick sources. And if there's any questions, I'll take those now.
Once again, I'd like to invite the panel to ask questions first.
And really relevant. I mean, it's just been in the news. I wonder, I guess, if you have thoughts about how fact that a lot of these women that are denied abortions in the U.S. and other countries and have to go, you said, I think, back street methods to have an abortion, how they don't have a voice. There's not a voice about that because it's this sort of subculture or not disclosed. And how do you think that changes kind of the political discussion that's going on?
So, like, are you saying, like, how should... I'm, like, confused by your question a little bit. Like
Okay, so there are a lot of abortions that take place
yes, backstreet.
in areas that, it's not allowed. And so it's being done by other methods.
Yes.
How do you think that contributes to what's going on politically now in the United States?
So I think that I actually don't think that people are very aware of these backstreet abortion methods. I don't think that people realize that women who cannot receive safe and legal abortions have to turn to these methods. I think most of they just don't realize. But I think that if people realize that if we get rid of these safe abortion laws and it just spikes the backstreet abortion methods, I think people will realize that, you know, limiting safe abortions doesn't actually lower abortion rates. It just increases unsafe abortion rates. So I feel like that's something important that people should be aware of. And they need to be aware of that removing safe access to abortions isn't lowering abortion rates at all.
I think that's a great response. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else?
Anyone else from the panel?
In keeping, I guess, in that same line, I would say that traditionally, right, over time, Congress and our government in general is very male-dominated. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, some of the more recent Congresses have the highest percentage of women that they've ever had, but it's still incredibly low. Do you think that over time, as that number of women increases in government, this becomes less of a talking point, period? Or will it always maintain its spot as a controversial issue?
I feel like it's always going to maintain its spot just because, you know, surprisingly, there are a lot of women who are against abortions, you know, which is okay. You know, pro-choice doesn't mean you're pro-abortion. It just means that you're pro-choice. You know, people can choose what they want to choose. But I think that if there's more women, I feel like people will feel safer when talking about it, because I feel like men just kind of shoot down the idea and they're just like, you know, like no abortions. I think if more women are in office, or even if more women are just have more control over this topic, I think it would be a lot more fair and it just wouldn't be completely eliminating like Roe versus Wade, for example.
Questions from the audience? Talking about like the U.S. specifically, do you think the whole pro-life, pro-choice debate is more affected politically or like religiously?
I want to say religiously, because, you know, like when you see, I'm sure we've all seen like people protesting abortions, and, you know, usually it's like, oh, like God is giving you this baby. Like I feel like a lot of people base their beliefs off of their religious perspectives, whether it be the Torah, the Bible, whatever. And I just think that like while you do have every right to practice your religion and use your religion to dictate your life, you cannot, I don't believe that you should be allowed to use those dictations on somebody else's life. So I think that more people are relying more on their religious aspects rather than like political. Like I feel like political parties, like they're kind of like split pretty evenly, but.
Great job, Kate.
Thank you.
I kind of have two questions.
Yeah.
You said that like people should be more educated on abortion methods and like how it affects women.
where do you think that that should be taught? Like, should that be taught in a sexual education class in school or education outside of school?
Yes, I do believe that sex ed would be a good place to teach about abortions. However, that is also going to be another contradicting topic because, you know, there's going to be some parents who don't want their kids to learn about abortions. But I think that we're going to stay on the same course for our future if we don't teach the new generations about what happens when women are denied abortions. I feel like people just usually focus more on denying the abortions and then not doing anything to help the mother with the baby. So I think sex ed, though, would be a good place to teach that, just because abortion can be seen as like an idea of a contraceptive or, you know.
And another question that I had was about exceptions, which you talked about. Do you think, because from what I've seen in the news and like politically, both sides to the argument are either they just want 100% either way, 100% pro-choice, or 100% just all abortions. Do you think that if more exceptions were involved, then it would be less politically and religiously like stigmatizing?
I think so. So like, you know, like, so are you saying like, you know, like there's rules, but then there's also like exceptions, like, you know, like you can't get an abortion at like 39 weeks pregnant, like that. Yeah, I do think that, you know, like while there are people who are like, oh, so you're just gonna like cut a baby apart or whatever, like those are, I feel like those are more extreme scenarios. But I don't really know how to answer that. I think so, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from our center section here?
I think Sarah has a question.
Sorry, Sarah.
So, based on what you found, do you think that, like, because I think you were showing the graph of the, like, BHS students, and they were more, like, accepting, like, towards pro-choice. Do you think that now, like, with the new generation, do you think that abortions are going to become more, like, accepted in the future? And how do you think that, like, schools and, like, how do you think families can teach their children to be more aware of what abortions are, and like how can it become less of a stigmatized topic in our country?
So I think that for losing like the stigmatism, I think that we just need to, instead of, you know, like talking about it, we need to just talk about the scientific facts. You know, you can't start bringing in like other things and like religion, and you can't, like, you know, a lot of people will call, like, I don't want to say like call like a fetus like a child, like when it's like 2 weeks old, 2 weeks like past conception, but it's like, I feel like calling it a child then like makes people think like a little baby, but that's not what it is. It's like the size of your pinky nail. So I feel like you just have to focus more on the scientific facts, because I feel like once you start bringing in other things, it sort of distorts the image a little bit. And I think when it comes to parents teaching their kids, I feel like that's like a more individual choice, like how you want to present it to your child, like what age, like how you want to do it. But I feel like abortions need to be talked about just as much as, say, birth control, condoms, practicing safe sex. I think it's just like those topics, so.
Thank you, Caitlin.
You're welcome.
We'll give our next speaker a couple of minutes to set up. going to take another short break so we can stay on schedule. If anybody wants to use the bathroom or get a cup of coffee in room 117, please go ahead. I'd like to have everybody seated. We're about to begin in a couple of seconds. At this time, I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome Mr. Myers from Lincoln Park, Superintendent, to our panel, and Ms. Sarah Brogan, who's been here for the last hour. Welcome. We're so happy you could be here. Our next speaker, a commended National Merit Scholar for placing in the top 50,000 PSAT tests in the nation, who's just committed to Brown for the fall for political science, Batiste Manhart is a young man to watch out for. His favorite subject is history, and he would like to eventually attend law school. But when he's just being a regular high school kid, Batiste loves playing computer games with his friends, board games with his family, soccer, running track, and working out in his free time. Here, with his very impactful thesis presentation on the effect of race on parental education of law enforcement, is Batiste Manhart.
So I did my presentation on how does race affect childhood law enforcement education. So essentially what I wanted to see was how does your race affect how your parents educate you about law enforcement as you grow up. I felt like this was a very important topic that is not really talked about a lot. There's a lot of studies on how does your race affect how adults view law enforcement. There's tons of them, you can look them up, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement recently. Lots of studies have been shown with how do police interactions differ with race and that kind of thing. But there's not a lot talked about how do different teens of different races view law enforcement before they have actually had an interaction. My main inspiration for this study was freshman year. I was talking to some of my friends, some of my black friends about law enforcement, just kind of growing up, that kind of thing. And they had started to talk to me about how their parents had started talking to them about what to do if they get pulled over. As a white middle-class person, my parents had always just said, respect the police, but if you ever need anything, make sure to contact them. My friend said almost the complete opposite. He described to me as his parents told him that you should immediately put your hands on the steering wheel, make sure that you're safe, make sure that there's no sudden movements or anything, and that, frankly, you should never really call the police until you absolutely need to. And that's when I decided that I wanted to do an actual study to see how different is it between myself as a white person and a lot of my friends who are from different minorities. Going to Boonton High School, we are at such a diverse high school with literally a mosque and a church on the same street, and so I figured this would be the perfect place to do this study. So another reason why it's very relevant to us is in 2008, there was 40 million police interactions across the US. 38% of them were 16 to 24-year-olds. Over 1/3 of them are in the age group of basically high school and college students. So I felt like this was a, frankly, glaringly, alarmingly statistic to look at to see how much of it we make up with that. And so I felt like this shows how even more important to look at, since we are easily the largest group by age of these interactions. So the main goals of my study, as I said, was to show any correlations between race and how you view law enforcement, but it was also kind of to show how parents may have said different things to people, to their kids based on their different races, as well as to educate fellow white people mainly, but also others, anyone who has maybe not realized as much about how much their growing up is different compared to their peers, simply because they never had to have a conversation about how to make sure that you survive a police encounter if you're pulled over at 15. So my procedure, I sent a Google form survey to all the high school kids at Boone High School, and I was worried I wouldn't get enough data, so I tried to contact other high schools. Given that it is such a touchy topic right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, not a lot of high schools were willing to help me. I contacted Pequannock High School, which is nearby, and their guidance counselor just said no. Montville High School, I almost did until they remembered they had a situation a couple years back, very recently, with something along this topic with parents. So unfortunately, they were not willing to. But luckily, Mr. DeGennaro, who used to teach business here, and he teaches now at Morris Hills High School, was more than happy to share my survey with his students. So in total, I got 127 responses. There's no way to differentiate between who is the Boonton High School responses and who is the Morris Hills responses. Two things to keep in mind, I would say, with my data is that, as you'll see on the next slide, the majority of the responses are from white people, or that's what they said they identify as for their race. Boonton is very diverse, but still, because we combine with Lincoln Park, it does make white easily the majority. And as far as Morris Hills, when I talked to Mr. DeGennaro, he said that a lot of his students were either white or Hispanic, which is why that is the two biggest categories. For my actual questions, I stuck to only 4 of them. 3 were mandatory. The last one I put as optional. First one, what is your race? What race do you identify with? I made this a multiple select, so I had Hispanic, white, black, East Asian, South Asian, a lot of different ones, I think about 7 or 8. So that's why on the next slide, you'll see different sections, for example, Hispanic, but then Hispanic white, because I made it multiple select. Then, how have you ever had a legal interaction before? So I wanted to clarify that not talking to a police officer, for example, your uncle's a police officer, but more, have you ever been pulled over? Have you ever been questioned by the police? A real life legal interaction where you are engaging with law enforcement. And then, how did you feel about law enforcement? This was just 1 through 5, 1 being very negative, 5 being very positive. A lot of studies you'll see don't have 3 for neutral. They'll have an even number, but the main reason I wanted to have neutral was to show a sense of not having any prior experience, so therefore not having really a say either way, and I'll go into that later. And then finally, this was my open-ended question that I got a decent amount of responses from. Some students did not really understand what the question was, but basically I wanted to see if there were any stories similar to what my friend had talked about from different races about how their parents have talked to them about law enforcement. So the first question was, what race do you identify with? And so as you can see, the majority of people, almost half, identified as white, which does skew a lot of the graphs, as you'll see. Then the second most popular group was Hispanic and Latina, and then there are a number of different combinations of Black and South Asian and East Asian and whatnot. There were a couple prefer not to say people, but luckily there were not that many, so it didn't really affect it that much. So the second question was, have you had a legal interaction with law enforcement? The majority of people have not, so which is good to hear because we're still in high school. All the people that were interviewed were still in high school. But surprisingly, about 40% of people have. So it's not exactly 50-50, but this is just good to keep in mind when looking at the next responses. So this is, what race do you identify with? And these people voted no to legal interaction. So as you can see, the majority of people that did not have a legal interaction were white and Hispanic. compared to a lot of the different minorities. And so because of that, a lot of the people that said yes, they had a legal interaction, white makes up 51% of this category. As I said before, one of the flaws of my study that I'll admit to is that there was a lot of white responses. As you can see in the beginning, almost half of my data was from people who identified as white, which I would have liked to have a little bit more evenly distributed, but like I said, when I contacted other high schools, they weren't really willing to help me to get other data. So now we're on to how do you feel about law enforcement? The majority of people voted 3, which is neutral or had no opinion. And I think this is really important to see because this shows that a lot of the high school students that I interviewed didn't really have a prior experience before or just did not really have an opinion. There were very few people who had either 1 negative, very negative opinion or 5 very positive opinion, which was good to see that a lot of them kind of had a shift, a little bit negative, a little bit positive. So the first one, very negative, 100% of the people that voted 1 were identified as white. There's only about 5 responses, so as I said before, there was not a lot of responses for either the 1 and the 5. It was more around the neutral area. So then this is the response of 2. Overall, I'd say the responses of 2 and 4 are pretty evenly distributed. White does make up the majority, but the Latino areas are also about the same, as well as some of the other races. This is probably the most important part of my data that I wanted to point out, which was my response of 3. So like as I said before, a lot of studies will not have a response of 3 because it skews your data, because that means that it's effectively no opinion. But in my data, in my experiment, it's a little bit different because the response of 3 shows that you either have not had an interaction and therefore you don't really have an opinion, or you just have a neutral view on it because you are so young and you haven't really developed your full opinion on it. So I think what's really interesting to see was that the white and the Hispanic population of my study made up almost the entire percentage of people who voted 3. And this just kind of made me think about how, relating back to those stories that I was saying, if you're growing up and you are from a middle-class family like me and you're white, you might not have had such an intense conversation about law enforcement, and therefore you might not really have an opinion. You might not have ever even had a legal interaction compared to some of your peers. Moving towards the positive view of law enforcement, this is a response of 4, which was somewhat positive. And as you can see, as moving towards the positives, it is almost entirely dominated by the white percentage of my population. This is over 50%. And here, at a response of 5, which is very positive, this is over 2/3% people that voted it identified as white. So the minorities begin to slowly start decreasing the percentage of them that voted in the positive direction as you continue. So the last part of my study was the open-ended question: how do parents interact with adolescents? I was very satisfied with the amount of responses I received with this. I was worried a lot of people would see an open-ended question and just decide not to answer it. It's very easy to click yes, no, true, false with a lot of the other questions, but when you see words, you don't always want to type out a whole response. But a lot of the peers in Boonton High School and Morris Hills High School were willing to give me some of their insights into how their family has raised them regarding it. I noticed a trend was that a lot of the people who identified as white didn't really understand this question. Some of them literally wrote, "I don't understand what this question means." Other people would write something along the lines of, "My uncle was in law enforcement," which was not really answering my question. But a couple of the minority responses that I'll talk about for a second, which I thought were the most impactful. One was someone who identified as African American and white, and they said that although they have never had a conversation about it, they recognize that their parents talked to their brother about the police. What is commonly referred to as the talk, based on my research, is a conversation that a lot of minority families have with their children at a very young age, 6th, 7th grade, which I definitely did not have any sort of conversation like, about what to do if you're pulled over as a minority. And a lot of the responses talked about this and talked about how even continuing through high school, as their friends and their siblings started reaching ages now where they can drive and it gets a lot more serious as you're in high school, these conversations continued. So a couple of the key takeaways I'd say with that is that I wouldn't say my study was necessarily definitely proven or anything like that. I was a little bit surprised by my data. As I said, one of the biggest flaws that if I was to do it again, I would want to have definitely more responses from other schools. My initial goal, very optimistic goal, was to try to get high schools across the country, but after a couple in my own local area, my own county, didn't respond to me, I didn't see how that was going to happen. So I'm hoping if it becomes less of a touchy topic just because it was only 2 years ago with the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the stuff going on with the riots and things like that, I'm hoping as that starts to become more of a social issue instead of a politicized issue, that a study similarly can be done again. I think an unrelated trend that I saw in my study was that some students wrote something along the lines of, "My parents disagree with my views on law enforcement." One particular student wrote that, "My parents think the Black Lives Matter movement is fake and that there's no such thing, like we don't need to support it, but I think differently." And this student was white, or identified as white, and they were one of the 5 people that put very negative for their response. And so something like that I think is kind of interesting to see, with my generation being a lot more open to challenging the ideas of their parents and starting to shift that mindset. And so I'm curious to see how that will look in the future as more and more of the situations that happen with things like this come into light. I'll now take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Batiste. We'll take questions from our panel.
Great job, Batiste. It's still current and relevant topic. And I want to touch on something you just mentioned there towards the end about your generation maybe breaking away from parents and just your survey results in general. Do you think as your generation continues to move up and grow up and then starts to get positions of power, they will make an effort to change the institution of police, or is that an untouchable thing?
I think that the way our government works now, change takes a very, very long time. And so I think that definitely we have a much more progressive mindset as opposed to older generations that don't necessarily feel like they'd like to see change in the future with that. So I'm not really sure just because I don't know our whole generation as a whole, but I'd say yes in general. I think this is definitely a topic that at least almost everybody around my generation has an opinion on. They might not necessarily want to see change or not, but I think at this point it is safe to say that most of the high schoolers across the country at least are aware of some form of, even if it's as simple as having heard of the Black Lives Matter movement or some form of police reform. I think everybody has some kind of opinion with it, whether it's as extreme as defund the police and take away all of their power and that kind of thing, or as simple as reallocating some of the resources that they have to try to improve the program.
Anyone else from the panel? Questions from the audience? Please state your name and the question.
Hi, my name's Mazzy. You said that maybe it can be explored more when it's not as touchy of a subject, but what in your research leads you to think that race is never, is going to become a less touchy subject?
I was referring to more recently, as I said, when I tried to contact some of the high schools, because it had been such a recent topic, a lot of the high schools, especially public high schools with parents, didn't really want to send a survey around asking such a very sensitive subject. So with that part, I meant more as it becomes less of a hot topic, so to say. I was hoping that then more high schools would be more cooperative towards sending out a survey or letting their students become part of research like that.
I guess also following up to that, do you think that high schools should also be exposing their children to things like this more often rather than kind of not sending out your survey and shading them from that because they had a recent experience?
I think that definitely that's part of the purpose of why I wanted to do my study, was to kind of educate other high school students. It's always difficult with public schools because in the end you depend on a lot of the parents and they have a lot of the impact. So if you live in a community where a lot of the parents, a lot of the families are white, they might not really think about this as much, and therefore to them it seems like a very touchy subject. I'm not sure how it might have differed if it was a very diverse community. Similarly to Boonton High School, they let me conduct this survey, but I'm not sure how, I would be curious to see kind of how it changes based on the race of the population of the high school.
Thank you, Mazzy. Anybody else from the audience?
I'm Ava Oberlin. Good job, Matisse. My question is that, okay, so when I was younger in elementary schools and middle school, we would have some days where the police would come in and talk to us about things regarding safety and things like that. And I think that that exposure to me when I was younger made me feel more comfortable with law enforcement, and that I know that if I ever needed to call the police, I would feel safe doing so. Do you think that that exposure in schools could be beneficial to students feeling more comfortable with law enforcement?
I think definitely it could have a positive effect. I know I had similar exposure. One of my mom's good friends, her husband is a cop, so I know growing up, my own family, I have a lot of members in law enforcement, so which is why I have personally always had a positive view, because I've always been surrounded by that, and I think it definitely could. I think one of the different things, though, is how your family impacts it. Similarly to Caitlin's study with abortion, educating people about it is one thing, but in the end, a lot of families like to push their own opinions onto it. And so, for example, even if you are a minority and you are educated about it here, and you see and you start to develop feelings of oh yeah, they're here to support me and that kind of thing. If you go home and your parents push onto you their opinions of, for example, no, they're not good, they are going to hurt you, whatever it may be, not necessarily even as extreme as that, but that kind of thing, I think it can definitely then start to create conflicting ideas, especially if a lot of your peers have a positive impact, but you have a negative one because of your parents.
Thank you, Ava.
Good job, Matisse. My name's Jules. I feel like a lot of time we hear the phrase be the change you want to see. How do you think this issue will influence minorities and people of color to be the change that they want to see? How do you think they would be more or less willing to go into law enforcement to be that change? How comfortable do you think they would feel?
I've seen it kind of go both ways. Talking to some of my friends, I know some of my friends who have had, or their parents have had bad experiences, have chosen to become police so that they hope that no one of their race or something like that will ever have an experience that they have had. With our generation in general, I think that that kind of goes with the progressive attitude and mindset that we have. So I know if it was me, for example, I'm into education reform, and that's why I want to eventually go into that, because I'm passionate about it, and I see that we need a lot of change. So I could see it encouraging minorities to want to kind of go into police reform or law enforcement in general, so that they become an example of that. But I could also see how if they have a negative association, it can be traumatic, and you don't ever want to be associated with that again. So I think it could go both ways, definitely.
Thank you, Jules. Anyone for questions?
Follow up to that, and also, nice job, Batiste. I know you did a ton of research and really would have liked to reach out to a lot more, or to reach a lot more people. Understanding that you have direct family and friends experience with people in law enforcement, do you think that there's anything that could be changed for law enforcement officer training, like pre-service, before they're on the job, to help combat this divide?
I think that's something that has been brought to light a little bit more recently with the George Floyd incident. And personally, what I would like to see more is allocating more of the funding towards a branch of the police or law enforcement, that kind of area, towards people who are able to help those with mental illnesses. I think that it is a lot to ask of a police officer to know how to operate a weapon and to do all of those, frankly, very dangerous situations. I mean, that's why they're getting trained. And I think some of it is having the pressure of having to act in a situation like that, but not having the training, for example, that a guidance counselor would have to de-escalate a situation. I think would improve it. More of a focus on, for example, the more psychological approach, not to the extent of like, as therapists or something like that, but I think definitely some kind of training along that would improve it, so that you don't ever have to reach a point where you are putting yourself in a dangerous situation, or a dangerous situation is being caused.
Does anyone else have any questions in the audience? All right, thank you so much, Batiste. At this time, we will take a short 15-minute break and resume with the next presentation at 10:35. Thank you. Before everyone leaves, I'd like to take a moment and thank Ms. Sarah Brogan for coming over from John Hill School and for her time. it'll just be a couple of seconds more. We have our next presenter presenting virtually, so she's taking a couple of seconds just to set up. We appreciate your patience. All right, welcome everyone. I hope you enjoyed your short break. And now, joining us virtually due to unavoidable circumstances is Sia Patel, our next presenter. Sia attributes her academic and personal growth to the Gateway Academy. She will be attending Rutgers University in the fall and is interested in pursuing a career in the healthcare field. In her free time, Sia enjoys listening to music, watching movies, and shopping. Please give her a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Sia Patel on the war on drugs.
Good to go, Sia.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I did my gateway presentation on the war on drugs. I'm going to be covering its origin and its effects. So to begin, what is the war on drugs? So in case you're not familiar with it, the war on drugs was introduced by President Richard Nixon in 1971. He claimed it was to address the drug abuse epidemic in the United States. He also wanted to take on a stricter position on drugs and other topics of that nature after a string of 8 years worth of Democratic presidents. So he wanted to add some more strict policy to the United States. The war ended up having an unfair effect on many communities of color and neighboring countries to the United States, which I will get into later. So to begin, two of our neighboring countries that ended up being negatively impacted by the war on drugs were Mexico and Colombia. So in Operation Intercept, Mexico was negatively impacted by the war on drugs. So with Operation Intercept, the U.S. had been first starting out trying to address the drug issue by going to our neighboring countries and trying to stop the flow through there. And with Operation Intercept, Nixon sought to stop the drug flow from Mexico and in turn helping the United States. And when he brought the idea up to President Ordaz did not address it by the means that Nixon wanted him to. So Nixon had stationed the U.S. troops at the border, which caused created a lot of obstacles, and it had the Mexican community feeling very betrayed and let down by the United States, as they had just signed a treaty basically ensuring their proper relations and organizations with one another just prior. Then with Plan Colombia, the United States launched this plan about 30 years after Operation Intercept, in which we had attempted to stop the cocaine production in Colombia by offering military and economic aid. And this plan sounded very, very effective. It sounds very beneficial, but it ended up having a number of negative consequences. For one, the military presence in Colombia ended up escalating drug-related violence, as many of the cartels in Colombia ended up changing their routes and commuting towards one area in the country. So there was a lot of competition over power, and it ended up having a great rate of fatalities after this plan was introduced. So how does the war on drugs tie to racism? So for one, a great deal of legal action was taken to launch the war on drugs. So two of these were the Comprehensive Crime Control Act and the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. These two worked in parallel and essentially introduced mandatory minimum sentencing. And what this did was ensure that if someone were to have been given a drug charge, they would be certain to spend a certain period of time in jail. So this could be like 110 months, 70 months, or longer. So before these acts were introduced, the percent of people in prison for drug offenses in 1986 was 9%, and the percent of people in prison for drug offenses in 2003, which is well after these acts had been introduced, was 57%. So you can see a clear increase in the amount of people imprisoned after the introduction of these acts. So to further explain the racial tie to it, is that African Americans account for 62% of people incarcerated under mandatory minimum sentencing, despite having nearly identical drug usage rates to white people. And with these two acts, it just further allowed for there to be an imbalance in how long black people spend in jail versus a white person, or any person of color would spend versus a white person, because the mandatory minimum sentence would fluctuate, which you would see negatively impacting the black community more than others. So to further illustrate this point is when stop and frisk was introduced in New York City, and essentially what stop and frisk did was it gave police officers the right to stop anyone in suspicion of having drugs. So if they were ever suspicious that someone was holding a illegal substance, they were able to stop them. And this is just on suspicion. And what this did was allow racial profiling to really come into play, and they were able to stop people of color at a dramatically increased rate over a white person when it comes to having possession of an illicit substance. To continue, I wanted to include one quote that came directly from Richard Nixon's drug policy advisor, and this is a confirmed quote. It's from John Daniel Ehrlichman. Here it is. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or blacks. By getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing them both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night in the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. This is a confirmed quote. So I also wanted to talk about the prison industrial complex because this was greatly impacted by the war on drugs and further pushed. So, according to the graph, you can see that the number of people in federal prisons starts to dramatically increase around 1986. And essentially what the prison industrial complex is it allows for people to be put from their lives and go straight to prison, where they're given maximum sentences and put in the prison, and then expected to stay and do work and stay locked up, and their bail is placed at a high rate. So if anyone were to want to bail out, they would have to pay a lot of money, and basically it keeps people trapped in prison. And often it is people of color that are more greatly affected by the prison industrial complex. Okay, so now we'll be talking about addiction response, because a main focus of my thesis paper was to ensure that we were finding new routes to address addiction rather than instant criminalization, which is the approach that the war on drugs had been taking. So one method that I found very helpful was rehabilitation in jail. And I conducted my own research on this subject, and I also observed research and consumed it from online. And there was a common link in saying that when inmates are given rehab in jail, they're more likely to be receptive of change, and they're just wanting to get well-rounded so that they don't turn to drugs that in turn cause them to spiral and ruin their life. And this further ties to harm reduction. So what harm reduction does is essentially you're working with people who want to build your life from the outside before they address your addiction. And so in these type of methods, addiction is treated as more of a disease than a crime, which is what it is. When someone is afflicted with addiction, as much as they try, in many cases, in many cases, end up going back to their addiction, which is why there's often a constant loop of people coming in and out of jail for drug charges. Okay, so in conclusion, there were many lasting effects on American society and political standing as a result of the war on drugs. There are many detrimental impacts on neighboring countries and communities of color in the United States, and the way we handled the war on drugs treated drug abuse as a legal concern rather than a health concern, which I think needs re-evaluation. So methods the American government can consider in approaching the drug crisis could be rehabilitation for prisoners and for drug crimes, or harm reduction therapy. I'll be taking any questions now.
Okay, so if Sia can't hear very well, I'm just going to repeat any questions, but this is the mic.
So we'll take questions from the panel now. I encourage the panel to ask questions. Our students have worked really hard to write their thesis, and they are looking forward to defending it.
So, hi Sia. I'm so glad that you still could join us. A nice job in the face of challenge. I would ask you, so I really like your recommendations, but I feel like I want to know more, or I want to see more, and I'm wondering if in your research you found any existing programs or therapies that are in effect now, but maybe on a smaller scale, that are successful, that could be maybe used as a model to scale up to bigger programs?
I'll try my best to answer your question. For my research, essentially what the rehab and jails and harm reduction does is they'll meet with the inmates that are all struggling with it, and it'll be like group conferences. So sometimes you'll just have a speaker and they'll talk about how their addiction has helped, I mean, not helped them, but impacted the rest of their life, or other areas of their life that need rebuilding. So when you address it in that way, and when you're asking the addict what else is there to them, they're able to focus on those parts, and in working on those, they are able to stabilize their life first, and then address their addiction, which is the usually lingering issue.
Right, so, okay, so you see that as a helpful therapy, helpful program. Why do you think it's not being implemented as much as it should or could be?
Well, I think that also has to do with the prison industrial complex and other means to carry out and continue racism in the United States. I don't think it's the sole reason. I think that's a factor. I also think that rehab and harm reduction, as helpful as we all want it to be, at the end of the day, it really does come down person to person. So if we were to make that the root method of addressing the issue, there's still always the chance that maybe they won't get better, maybe the addiction is really that bad. So we still have a lot of work we need to do in that field before we can make a full change to rehabilitation and harm reduction.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Sia. I'm Allison Chesler, the principal of School Street School. You did a wonderful job. You spoke about some of the measures they take once they are imprisoned, but did any of your research look into any preemptive measures or programs that the government runs prior to people being arrested? So almost, what are some programs that we can introduce to our younger population before they get hooked on drugs?
Okay, that's an interesting question. My research didn't really expand so far into before the addict is put in jail, but from my knowledge and from what I do know, I know that programs like the DARE program are implemented in middle schools, and you start from a young age and you show kids the reality of what addiction can look like, so it's to scare them out of it. Also, there are great NAAA programs that will allow people to feel comfortable attending them once they develop the addiction and they want to get better. But I think that those should be broadcasted far more so people know that it's okay and that they just need to be focused on getting help and getting better.
And do we know the rate of success to which our DARE programs, how successful they are for schools that have DARE programs, and a correlation between drug addiction in those areas?
What I do know is that as it stands, our rehabilitation and harm reduction programs are effective, but they're still not effective enough to make them the sole response to these type of situations. I think there's a lot more that can be done, but that isn't to say that specialists aren't optimistic. So I couldn't tell you the exact statistics, but this is as far as I know.
Hi, Sia. It's Miss Maven. Great to see you. I'm sorry you're not feeling well. My question, I'm so happy that you're framing drug abuse as a mental health problem and addressing that it should use mental health treatment as opposed to criminalization. I think that's a really wonderful thing to bring to the table. So I'm wondering how you conducted your research. What did you do? Did you look at existing research? Did you interview people? How did you come to this conclusion?
Well, it was a combination of both. So I did a lot of research where I was just reading articles and studies, and I spent a lot of time doing that. I also did conduct an interview with someone who works with rehabilitation of addicts, and I got to learn a lot. And that was also where I learned a lot about rehab and harm reduction and its efficacy. So it was very beneficial. But with all of my research together, I was able to form my own opinion on it and then present this topic.
Hi, Sia, it's Mr. Meyer. During your research on the war on drugs and the history of what's led up to where we are today, what did you find most shocking or disappointing?
Definitely what I read about President Nixon's drug policy advisor, because it's almost like it's like a state of denial until somebody comes out and says it from, the people that were behind the curtain. I just thought, I was shocked when I read the quote.
I think you did a great job, and the more information that could be shared about decisions like that, I think it's important for the American public to know. So I think it's great that you investigated this topic. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience?
Hi, Sia. It's Ava. My question is, I know that this is more recent, but with the legalization now of marijuana, did you find anything about what they're doing to people that were criminalized for marijuana charges that may still be in prison for that once it becomes legal?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you exactly what the government's doing about that, but I do know that there's a lot of commotions in society trying to get those people that are put in for unfair drug charges out, or at least reduce their sentence. But I do think the legalization of marijuana is a really good first step towards addressing how we handle addiction and drug-related charges.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ava. Any other questions from our audience? All right, great job, Sia. I hope you feel better soon, and we'll see you soon when you get back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next senior is a study in contrast. This three-sport athlete playing soccer, wrestling, track and field, who likes to hang out with his friends, is a real-life softie who will be majoring in animal science at Rutgers. Luca is looking forward to veterinary medicine after college. He is excited for his bright future and thanks the Gateway Academy for helping to prepare him. Luca is raising awareness on the little-known topic of Anthropocene extinction and its impact. Luca DiGiacopo, everyone.
My name is Luca DiGiacopo, and I did my senior thesis on the Anthropocene extinction and preventative measures. So, just a little background information. I chose this topic because I've always had a deep love for animals, and they've always been a part of my life. And I plan on furthering my education in the field of animal sciences and pre-vet. My thesis is there have been multiple precautions taken against the decline of animal populations and environments, but we are still entering the Anthropocene extinction. What is What is the Anthropocene? The Anthropocene is the sixth mass extinction that we are currently heading towards. Anthropo meaning human and scene meaning new. They're both Greek words that together mean a new era that were created by humans. It is believed to have started between the 1800s and the 1950s, around the Industrial Revolution and nuclear bomb testings. An epoch is measured by the chemical composition in soil and if it has a lasting effect. The Anthropocene has left its mark, but is yet to be determined if it will stand. EMSY. EMSY stands for Extinctions Million Species Per Year. In this graph, there's a gradual descending trend in the slope, starting all the way in the Cambrian period, ending all the way down in the Anthropocene. And you can see the Anthropocene is very small, about 0.5 extinctions per year that was hypothesized. So it seems very insignificant, but in reality it is not, because there has been a ton of population decline in species across the globe. The IUCN Red List. The IUCN stands for International Union for Conservation of Nature. The IUCN states that there are 338 species in the last 500 years that have gone extinct. This is a comparable extinction rate to the Pleistocene extinction that had the lowest extinction rate of all time. If you subtract 250 extinctions from 338 species that have gone extinct, you are left with 88 total species. And of these 88, all of them were caused by humans, which is the highest record ever, and is believed to increase by 1,000, even 10,000 in upcoming years. The extinction of insects. There are 2.6 million to 7.8 million terrestrial invertebrates versus 25,000 species of vertebrates, meaning there is a ton more insects that are known and documented more than there are mammals and fish and reptiles and birds. Research was conducted on 25,260 of species of butterflies, tiger beetles, damselflies, and dragonflies, and 653 insects went extinct, increasing our believed rate to about 1.5 species per year. And this is a picture of a west-eastern tiger beetle. Population decrease. The World Wildlife Fund provides information on approximately 10,380 vertebrate populations. And of these populations, they experienced a decrease of 68% since 1970s. In 17 species of large pelagic fish, there was a 74% decrease. A large pelagic fish is a top of the ocean swimmer, like a tuna or a salmon. There are 350 species of seagrass coral inhabiting fish that are documented, and of them about 34% decline. And the most intriguing, to me at least, the most intriguing decline was of commercially fished fish that experienced a 90% decline. Cloning. There have been a bunch of preventative measures taken to boost endangered animal species, one of the most important being the black ferrets. In 2010, 7 members of the black-footed ferret population remained. Now in 2022, there are 600. What they did was they cloned older ferrets that were no longer allowed to breed or able to, and they cloned them and found surrogate mothers so they were able to reproduce and increase the genetic variability. Another preventative measure taken is assisted migration, and what's considered the most prominent example is the marbled butterfly. The marbled butterfly inhabits southern England, and their species experienced a decline. What scientists did is they took 500 of the butterflies and then moved them 65 kilometers north. These butterflies then were able to thrive and grow their species. This is because the species did not alter the food chain. My research. I did my research at Boone High, and what I did was I interviewed a handful of teachers. What I asked these teachers were 3 questions. Are you aware of the current mass extinction? Have you seen the Anthropocene extinction highlighted in the media? And have you taken your own personal steps? One fault I have with my own research was I was not able to get a ton of responses. I only got a handful, maybe 5 or 6. But when I asked the teachers, their all answers were consistent. So when I asked them if they're aware of the current mass extinction, they all said yes. And I asked them if they had seen it in the media, they also said yes. They said they've seen it in the news, in social media, or on YouTube. And I asked them if they've taken their own small personal steps to lessen the effects of the Anthropocene and pollution, and all teachers answered yes. May it be something small like picking up garbage on the side of the road, recycling, or even composting. Conclusion. There are 88 human-caused extinctions. The human-caused extinction rate increased 1,000% and is expected to raise 10,000%. But extinction is not the main reason to worry about the Anthropocene extinction. The main worry is population decline. If populations are starting to decline, there will be less genetic variability, and species will not be able to live, and it will start to cause genetic mutations, ultimately ending a species. That is my end of my presentation. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Luca. I think we all know more about Anthropocenes now than we did this morning. Questions from the panel?
Nice job, Luca. Yeah, I feel so educated now of this topic that I didn't really know all that much about. I'm wondering, one of the things that you highlighted were these ocean species and the high percentage rates of population decline. And then I see here in your conclusion that you're talking about pollution kind of being, I guess, linked to it. Were you able to find specific links there?
Yeah, I did. There was tons. When I was doing my research, I found tons and tons of garbage that was dumped into the oceans. I didn't include it because I couldn't find any like really definitive things on Google Scholar. That's where I tried to look and keep my information. But there was a lot of garbage dumped in the ocean. But the main decline in the oceans is overfishing and invasive species that are killing native species.
So, and just to follow up too, I wonder, you say here there's 88 human-caused extinctions, and this is like that we know of, right? I mean, it seems like there's so many different species all over that there's things that we probably aren't even aware of. If something can be linked to overfishing or polluted waterways, that's one thing to say, okay, yes, there's a definite link, a direct link to that species extinction, but then that in turn has like a chain reaction effect with other species within like ecosystems. So there might be these secondary extinctions. Would that be human caused? Would that be considered human caused as well? Like, does it trickle down that way?
In many cases, it could. I didn't find anything in that specific circumstance, but I personally would consider that, yes, human caused, because they killed the species that maybe this one used as a food source or had a symbiotic relationship, something like that.
Hi, Luca. I can tell you're very passionate about this topic, and it's very interesting. What would you say are the biggest threats to genetic diversity and extinction, personally?
Like, what's the main
What's causing
cause?
these human-caused extinctions?
I would probably say destruction of ecosystems and invasive species is a big one, because humans, they bring animals over for produce, or if they have pets, and release them into the wild. A very prominent case is Burmese pythons in the Florida Everglades. People brought them over as pets and they killed everything. They're a new apex species. They even kill crocodiles and alligators.
So even these invasive species are like brought by humans to new populations that they don't belong in, and that's causing that.
Yes.
And what are your recommendations for fixing this?
I think there could be more awareness brought. A lot of when I talked to the teachers, they knew about it. They knew it was a thing. They didn't really know what the Anthropocene was exactly, but they knew that we were in an extinction and or not a national, but a global crisis, like in our ecosystems. So I think more awareness could be brought. The title could be shared around more, and more information could be presented.
Hi, nice job. This is something that I care very much about as well. And I think one of the challenges is getting people to understand, and I'm curious if you had any ideas that came up in your research, when people's economic success is at risk, they're much more unwilling to be concerned about something like this. You hear a lot in the news about the spotted lanternfly because it's a nuisance to people in our area, and that's an invasive species, or it may affect our crops, which is something we worry about. But how do we get people to worry about things like, pythons killing alligators? Well, I'd like to see an alligator if I go to Florida, but that's not really impacting me. So I think people aren't always as concerned. Any ideas how we can try to address that?
I think we could prevent ways that it affects their lives, So like, say this species is destroying your ecosystem. Oh, like the spotted lanternfly, it's killing your crops, it's killing your plants. This tree might not be around much longer if we don't do something about this. So I think that would be a good way to combat it, make it more important in people's lives, is to see, or not see, but like show how it could affect their lives.
Hi, Luca. Great job. My question for you is, has there been any legislation to regulate, you spoke about overfishing and things like that. Has there been any legislation to monitor or restrict?
Recently in my research, I didn't find anything about overfishing, but I know there's laws against, like hunting season. You can only get a certain amount of this animal per season. So that's a law that you can't break that will also protect species and from being overhunted.
Any other questions from the audience? We have a few questions, so I'll pass the mic around.
So in your last slide, you talked about how genetic diversity and that can really affect how a species is. How does that work with apex predators though? Because if you're an apex predator and you don't have anything that's trying to kill you, then you never evolve. Like for example, the crocodile, the alligator, haven't really changed that much besides getting smaller than they were before. So how come they don't just become extinct over time?
That's a good question. They still have, if they're the apex predator, they're staying on top, they're eating and thriving. But if the genetic variability of species that they're eating on lessens and those species start to die, then eventually it'll catch up to the apex predator and they'll die too.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a quick question. Are you going into wildlife for in college? Is that what you're pursuing, or?
I'm taking an animal science track, eventually leading up to pre-veterinary sciences. And after I graduate from college, I plan on going further on to get a PhD in veterinary sciences.
Do you know what field you want? Is it companion animal, or is it equine, or do you not really have that figured out yet?
I don't have that figured out yet, but I'm most likely going to husbandry, animal husbandry.
Good job, Luca. I found it really interesting. My question is that recently there's been a push for a lot of people to go vegetarian or vegan. Do you think that could really change the extinction rate?
I think it could, because grazing is a main factor in habitat loss. So people bringing their cattle that are destroying and competing against native species are killing them off. So I think, yes, if people were to go vegan, it would help the extinction rate, but I don't think people have to go vegan. I think it should just be better regulated, so it does not compete directly against native species and kill them off.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Great job, Luca. Thank you. So, panel, how are you finding our presenters?
These are fantastic.
Yes, they've done an awesome job, and we have our mentors to thank for that as well, for the guidance and support. At this time, we are going to take a lunch break. We will return at 12:15 for our afternoon presentations. I would encourage the seniors to stick around for a few minutes, and the panel as well. We'll take a few pictures, and then we'll proceed to lunch.